Hello and welcome to another edition of Critical Q&A, the show where I answer your questions based on what you've left for me in the comments section below in my Q&A videos, or send to me by email at askchrisshelton@gmail.com. You know, I am having a blast doing this, and we've got some big questions today, so I'm going to get right to it. But I did want to put in a little plug for my podcast, the Sensibly Speaking podcast. If you guys haven't heard of it or checked it out, please do so. It's at sensiblyspeaking.com, or I also upload episodes here on YouTube. I think you'll find them pretty interesting, and and if you have any comments or feedback about it, let me know also in the comments section. All right, we've got some great questions this week. Let's get to it. Christina. Hi, Chris. Firstly, just letting you know that your videos are awesome. Secondly, I had a question with regards to how Scientology operates in different countries, specifically in the UK. I live in the UK and have not encountered Scientology, but wondered if one would notice a difference going to a Church of Scientology based in the US as opposed to a Church of Scientology based in the UK. I appreciate that you may not know unless you've been to a UK-based church. Thanks. Well, actually, like McDonald's, Scientology is rather universal. You always get the same Big Mac everywhere you go. And in this case with Scientology, I have spoken with and interviewed people who have been in the UK and have done services in the UK. And of course, I met a lot of people who came over from the UK. Was on the RPF with them, I was in the Sea Org with them, and this experience is pretty much exactly the same in terms of how they wrangle you in, how they deal with you, how they are after your money, and the mind control and all the procedures and everything are all exactly the same. And of course, they kick you to the curb just as easily if you start speaking out against it or wondering what's really going on behind the curtain. So I don't think you're going to find anything beyond maybe some local color that's different from place to place. I don't think you'll find any change in methodology or how they go about doing what they do. And that's my take on that. Bob S. Seeing as Scientologists seem convinced Hubbard will return, evidenced by the home awaiting him at their base in California and offices prepared for him at all orgs, what do you think would happen if someone showed up claiming to be Hubbard reincarnated? Also, Miscavige is no spring chicken. Do they have, or do you think there is, any secession plan? If so, what might it be? Hard to imagine Miscavige has any intention of ever stepping aside, but he isn't getting any younger. His health could deteriorate, especially if he's an addicted smoker, as so many in the cult seem to be or have been. I question if they receive regular health checkups or get regular medical care. All right, a couple questions here, but let's just sort of take this up broadly. No, I don't think if somebody showed up claiming to be Hubbard that anybody would really take him very seriously, because how would you prove something like that? There was talk, or there was some idea maybe that codes were left, or pass phrases or something like this. But to be honest with you, I think that's all a bunch of crap. I don't think there was anything like that, because I don't think Hubbard was in a frame of mind of particularly thinking through the fact of him coming back and proving that. And in fact, I think he even said in that OT8 Lucifer reference that he was going to come back as a politician or something, that he wasn't going to try to come back as Scientology's next leader. So I think this is all just fueled by imagination and wishful thinking on the part of Scientologists, who never otherwise engage in wishful thinking. and I don't think there's any kind of planning at all for that. And I wouldn't be surprised if there were already a number of people who've come back saying they were Hubbard in a past life and got, short shrift or got shown the door. As far as Miscavige and his secession plan goes, just forget it. He doesn't have anything like that planned. He has no plans at all of ever turning over power, and I don't think he has any idea of his own mortality or the fact that he's going to be dying or leaving anytime soon. And I don't think smoking or drinking bothers him in any way, shape, or form, because he is who he is and he acts the way that he acts. So no secession plan, none. If there was, I'd be shocked. Because that's not really how the guy operates. And nobody else around him is thinking that way. that I'm aware of. There's never been any talk about that. Nobody's ever come out and said anything about any such thing, because they're too frantic and they're being made to work too hard. And they're, it's sort of like, would the slaves at a plantation have a secession plan for if the slave master died? I don't think so. I don't think that's how they'd be thinking. And the slave master, if he was a sociopath who didn't care about anybody else, certainly didn't care about his slaves, what would he care after he moves on? Doesn't care at all. And I think that would be a pretty good analogy for that picture. As far as health checks go and whatnot, I'm sure Miscavige goes to the doctor or gets himself checked up, as often as he sees fit. But in the Sea organization, there is no such planning. There is no such regular health checkups or anything like that. You're lucky to get any funding at all if you have any kind of chronic physical illness or chronic health situation. And it's only when it becomes so bad that you can't do your job anymore that they'll even pay any attention to you at all. So there you go. Curious onlooker. There have been many high-profile exposés of Scientology, recently including the Emmy-winning HBO documentary Going Clear. Similar accounts have come up time and again through the history of Scientology. How are public relations flaps, TV or newspaper series, public protests, unflattering news stories, etc., experienced by you when they occurred? Are staffers informed about such things or shielded from them? Did they alter your work assignments in any way? This is a great question. Basically, when there was any sort of what we called N theta in the news or in the news media, and in Scientology, almost all news media is sort of painted with this brush of N theta. In other words, it's bad news. It's stuff that's just going to make you upset or antagonize you, and it's a bunch of lies and stuff that's purposefully painted to give a distorted view of things. That's one way of looking at N theta. And so Scientologists label all of this stuff as N theta, and so they don't want to look at it. They go, oh, N theta, I don't want to look at that. So if there's any sort of N theta presented in the media, if there's any hint of anti-Scientology or negative criticism of Scientology in the media, Scientologists are indoctrinated to automatically put the shields up and not want to look at it. It's an amazingly brilliant form of mind control because it's them policing themselves. And they are indoctrinated in such a way that they are convinced that it will be harmful to them and disrupt their ability to do Scientology by being exposed to any criticism of Scientology. It is the stupidest, most mind-numbing idea to think that looking at criticism of something is somehow going to be detrimental to your mental health. It is almost teeth-gnashingly stupid. And I bought into it for years, so I know what I'm talking about when I say I was an idiot for following that. And now that I'm not following it and I can see how it works and how it's done, I have to say it's just flat out stupid. And it's a purposefully indoctrinated stupidity in people who otherwise aren't stupid people, which is why it's so amazing. But that happens in all destructive cults, not just Scientology. Not by any stretch is it just Scientology. So it's a whole pattern operation that occurs with people in destructive cults, and it's one of the signal indicators that you are dealing with a destructive cult is getting people into the mindset that they are not allowed to, or that it's destructive to look at any criticism of your group. You should be free at any time, anywhere, 24/7, 365 days a year to look at any information you want of any kind having to do with anything. And if you think otherwise, I think you might want to review your ability to think and look at where that idea comes from, that it might be damaging to you to look at something critical or negative, because there's nothing wrong with doing that. As far as staffers being informed of it, there are warnings given to staff if it's thought that they might be exposed to information, like when, all the way back in 1991 when the Time magazine article came out about Scientology being the cult of greed. Everybody was told, don't read that, right? It's just en theta. And when Nightline aired an interview with David Miscavige, also I think back in 91 or back in that time period, there was a 10 or 15 minute intro that ABC News made to that interview that detailed the OT3 data and made fun of various Scientology practices. And so a lot of Scientologists were actually told not to watch videos of that. Or the church provided an edited version that didn't have all that in it. And that's what we were watching. And that's how I watched that interview to begin with, was I watched the authorized version of it. And you just get, like I said, you just kind of get used to that, where it just becomes a habit or a pattern. So how did that disrupt our work? When protesters would come around, like Anonymous in the late 2000s, they just shut down the church. They just close off all the doors, all the windows, they cover up the blinds, and we're not allowed to look at them, see them, and within the bubble world, our reaction to that was always sort of an eye roll and a, Jesus, what do these guys, think they're doing? Because we were just kind of fed up with the protests, kind of like what we didn't understand in the bubble world why the protests were occurring, because we didn't know what our own church was actually doing to people. Unless you're at the highest levels, or unless you're at a place where you're the one who's committing those kind of gross human trafficking and human rights violations against people, you don't necessarily know that these things are going on. Or you have it painted in such a way that it's not what it looks like it is. It's actually something else, right? So the world view from inside the bubble world is a very different view than when you get out of the bubble world. So we were always annoyed and felt sort of harassed and sort of put upon that these protesters would come around, and it was sort of a, why can't these guys just go do something constructive with their lives? Why do they have to come after us? We're just trying to help people. And for, a lot of Scientologists, that's their attitude. That's what they think, is we're just trying to help people. Why are these people so anti, Scientology? Why are they so down on our religion and stuff? And it's just because they don't look and they don't know what their organization's actually doing. So that's kind of the view from inside. Dolly Jean. I know that Scientologists are against drugs and medicines in general, but was curious about their stance on drinking alcohol. I understand you're not supposed to drink before session or while on the Purif, but is it considered okay to drink recreationally at all? Also, what about smoking? From what I hear, there are a lot of Scientologists who smoke, including David Miscavige, so wouldn't they see that as hypocritical, as it is a type of drug too? There are no prohibitions on drinking or smoking in any level of Scientology, and a lot of Scientologists drink and smoke. Sea Org members get totally drunk off their ass a couple times a year when they have parties. In December, there's the Christmas party, and there's the Bosun's party. And these are celebrated for their drunken revelry. Also, there's Sea Org Day, and some people will drink on Sea Org Day, which I think is in September. So no prohibitions on that. The thing about auditing is you can't drink within 24 hours of going in session, because it's supposed to mess with your, it's supposed to mentally impair you. And so you wouldn't have as good of a session if you're hungover or something like that. And that kind of makes sense in terms of, psychological counseling or something. But nobody cares about smoking. And in fact, there's even a lecture Hubbard gave at St. Hill back in the 60s, where he talked about nicotine being beneficial to you and something that was good for you even. So he said the anti-smoking guys have it all backwards. So Scientologists will just take that kind of stuff and run with it. And when smoking became I think it was in the 80s and 90s, at least as far as my awareness goes, when smoking became really, started to be looked at as a harmful thing, and all the ads started coming out, and all that kind of stuff. Scientologists responded to that by, taking better care of themselves. But that didn't have anything to do with Scientology. That had to do with, public relations campaigns against smoking because it's bad for you. And Scientologists generally do care about their health, and they generally do get involved in a lot of woo regarding health. You'll see Scientologists who will get into all kinds of food fads and diet fads and health fads constantly. There were constantly health fads going through the base, the Sea Org base where I was posted. I mean, the raw meat diet and the paleo diet and I can't even remember all the different things that they would do, trying to live better and live a healthier life, take care of their bodies. Because there's nothing wrong with taking care of your body, and Scientologists want to be healthy just like anybody else. As far as it being hypocritical, they don't really see it that way because alcohol and smoking are considered sort of lower class drugs. I mean, they'll admit, yeah, sure, that's a drug. Okay, yeah, nicotine is a drug and alcohol is a drug, but it doesn't have any really lasting harmful effects unless you're an alcoholic or a smokeaholic. So this is what they would say, right? And so they don't really see the issue with it versus, say, pot, coke, meth, heroin, LSD. I mean, that's, now you're getting into real serious levels of drugs, right? And they're not going to get involved in those. So there's it's kind of arbitrary. It's sort of, opinionated, but that's kind of how they think of those things. Dr. Snap. Hi, Chris. Thanks for the great videos. Hubbard claimed that by doing Dianetic and Scientology processes, ordinary people could become super beings. According to Mr. Hubbard, a Dianetic clear is able to completely recall everything which has ever happened to him or anything he has ever studied, able to do mental computations, such as those of chess, for example, which a normal would do in a half an hour in 10 or 15 seconds, able to think spontaneously, not merely vocally, has a vigor, persistence, and tenacity to life much higher than anyone has thought possible, etc. According to Mr. Hubbard, an operating Thetan can levitate objects, read minds, view remote locations and events, communicate over long distances, predict the future, cure himself of serious illnesses like cancer, remember past lives, etc. So, Chris, here's my question. Do Dianetic clears and Scientology OTs have these godlike powers? If not, why don't Scientologists see they don't have them, wise up, and leave? Hubbard did say all those things are possible with Dianetics and with Scientology. He promised the world and beyond. And people get into Dianetics and Scientology because they want those to be real and they want to experience those, and they are willing to pay good money to achieve those kind of godlike powers. So everybody who comes in wants those things, and therefore they want to believe in them. They're invested in it, especially when they start investing a lot of money in it. And that's important because the more you're investing your time and your energy and your life and your money in something, the more willing you are to believe that that would be something you're going to get back. And the less interested you're going to be in taking a hike if it's not manifesting, right? The more chances you're going to give it, the more credit you're going to give to this organization to make good on its promises to you. So that's sort of the mindset that people are in when they're going into these things. And what happens is they start going through the Dianetics auditing or the Scientology auditing, and basically there's two kinds of people here. There's the people who will basically believe anything you tell them, and then there's the people who eventually wise up and they do leave. And a great number of people who have left Dianetics and Scientology have done so because it became manifest to them that it was not delivering what it promised. I mean, Jason Begay talked about this in his first big long interview when he had gotten out, and he'd said, show me a fucking clear, right? Like, where are they? There aren't any because they don't exist. But, and he had gotten fed up with it, and he finally saw that and he left. It usually seems to take a little bit more than that in order to get somebody to go, but not actually true. There are a lot of people who just look at it and go, yeah, no, this isn't really happening, and they go. Those people don't necessarily feel persecuted or have had something done to them by the church, so they don't necessarily speak out, so you never really hear from those people, but they exist. And then you have the people who will basically believe anything, and so what the church tells them is that you haven't achieved those abilities yet, but they're coming when you do your next level, right? You just have to do the next level. You just have to keep going, which means more money, more time, more energy, more sacrifice. But what happens is they have some auditing or they do some training in Scientology and they feel a little better. They have a euphoric experience. They have an adrenaline rush. They have some new realization about something, and oh wow, I never looked at life that way before. There's so much truth here in what Hubbard is saying in this book. I never thought of that before. So because they get a little bit of a gain, right, that doesn't really last that long. I mean, within a day or two, it's forgotten about. They're moving on. If you were to go to any Scientologist and read them their success stories or their wins or their gains from years earlier, they would have been, one for one, I guarantee you, they'd be like, oh wow, yeah, did I say that? Like they wouldn't even remember. The exceptions are few. So you have people who are having this succession of small gains, small bits of euphoria, and they credit that with so much more, that it means so much more than what it really means. All it means is that something nice happened to them once, and it's gone. And once it's gone, it's not permanent. It doesn't stay with you. Your life isn't different. You can't now have the spiritual ability to levitate objects. Nobody in Scientology can do any of that crap, because that's not what Scientology does. So, but because they have this series or succession of these wins and these gains, they keep giving credit to Scientology and to Hubbard, and they keep wanting to believe that there's going to be more coming. And so they stick with it, and they stick with it, and they stick with it. And they're told, that the whole con is built on this idea that it's just over the next hill. The big gains are right over the next horizon, right? You just got to keep going. And they have all kinds of stupid sayings in Scientology to keep people going, like you have to be OT to go OT, right? Meaning you have to, basically what that really means is you have to make really big sacrifices and make it go right by paying a lot of money, way more money than you would ever imagine you'd be paying out for this kind of crap. That's what it means to be OT in Scientology, is you're making it go right to pay them a lot of money. And by doing so, that's how you go OT, right? Which is really, if you think about it for a second, is the most illogically backwards thing you'd ever have, because if you can be OT, why would you need to go OT? You're already being OT. Like, how is this supposed to work? So anyway, that's kind of a little bit of what goes on with that and why people persist in it when they really shouldn't be. All right, here's another big question, this one from MG. In one of your Q&A videos, you talk about why Scientologists were not allowed to talk about their sessions. You mentioned the example of two people thinking they had been Caesar and Cleopatra, remember? Now, in 30 years of Scientology, one thing that I was totally sure of was having lived before this life. The first time this belief received a fissure was when I met an auditor in the cafeteria one day. He uttered a big sigh. Me, why are you sighing? Auditor, oh, I have just been auditing yet another Jesus Christ for hours. Me, so what makes you sigh about that? Auditor, I have audited a few hundred of Jesuses, I think, so far. It is really boring. Now that made me really think whether these memories of past lives aren't really mere projections, images, or something like one also would see when taking psychotropic drugs. How else could you explain that so many people would believe having been Jesus Christ in a former life? Another doubt kicked in when I had a burnout 2 years ago, which erased a great part of my memories. So when theta facsimiles really existed, they wouldn't be wiped out by a depression or burnout, right? So I come more and more to the conclusion that this whole concept of thetans living in different bodies is another pseudoscientific nonsense, as so many other parts of the teachings. I can imagine that there is some sort of a yet undiscovered life energy, yet are afraid that all of my personal grandeur and splendidness one day will be eaten by worms like everybody else's. As this concept of previous lives is one of the basic collars of Scientology and many other religions, I would be really curious how you see it today with some years of distance from this indoctrination. Having studied everything that I have so far about memory and memory loss and delusional memory and fabricated memories and people's desire to believe things, and having actually in the last couple of years looked at some things from my own past where people reminded me of things that I had done when I was a kid or a teenager or when I was in Scientology that I had utterly forgotten about and never would have remembered if somebody hadn't poked or reminded me of it. I am convinced that the past life memories in Scientology are nothing but a bunch of nonsense. I've never seen any instances of past lives presented with scientifically valid evidence that has been peer-reviewed and rigorously tested to ensure that it's actually valid. There's plenty of stories out there about kids who can remember things in earlier lives and that sort of thing. And you know, maybe there is something to that. I don't know. But I do know that in Scientology, I have personally seen exactly the kind of examples that this question is asking about. You wouldn't believe how many people have said that they were Arthur Hubbard. Or, so I don't doubt that there are people who are also saying they were L. Ron Hubbard, or people who have been audited by L. Ron Hubbard. I mean, we're talking about so many people that it's beyond reality. And much less famous people, Jesus Christ, Cleopatra, Anthony, Caesar, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, all the people throughout history who people have delusions of grandeur about wanting to be. Because who wants to have been a lowly little peasant that got his head lopped off, Or who wants to be, a guy who was a slave worker, on the Great Wall of China or something. I mean, who wants to have been that? Nobody wants to have been that. They want to be epic. They everybody views their own life as an epic tale, and people want to view their past lives as even more so of that. So I don't think that there's any real reality to any of that. I have a personal hope and desire that there is more to life than just this. I would like there to be a spiritual existence, and so I choose to believe that there's a spiritual existence. And I don't really think about it too much more than that because I got no proof for it. And logically speaking, and as a critical thinker, I really have, very little reason to believe in an afterlife or any kind of life energy or theta or anything like that. So I just classify it as a hope more than I'll say a belief, because it is a hope for me. And that's kind of where I've arrived at. And I've rejected Hubbard's whole mythology and his whole sort of grand idea of galactic councils and Xenu and the space opera and all of that sort of thing. I definitely am a believer in the odds of there being life on other planets in this universe, given the grand scope of the universe. Of course there must be life in other planets, just the odds are such that it would be that way. But that doesn't necessarily, bleed over into the idea that we're all spiritual beings living life after life after life and that sort of thing. There's a lot of logical reasons not to believe in that. So I don't go for that view anymore. GS. I did not know that the church canceled people's auditing levels such as clear. Was this just another money-making scheme by COB, crime organization boss David Miscavige? How can this be squared with the idea of standard tech, which is supposed to have been nailed down solid before LRH had died? I know of others who went clear and they did not have their levels invalidated. How did they decide who was going to have their levels canceled? Since we are hearing that the org's stats are crashing, aren't the staff constantly in danger or lower eating rice and beans, getting half or no pay, and having very poor morale? Bluntly speaking, yeah, the whole idea of invalidating people's earlier levels in Scientology is nothing but a money grab. And considering that all of Scientology is a money grab, are we really surprised that they're, doing something like that? Of course we're not surprised. Miscavige will do anything to keep the funds rolling in and keep the people occupied, because he's got a real problem, which is he can't deliver OT 9 and 10 and 11 and 12 up to 15. One, because he doesn't have them, and two, even if he did have something, it's not going to give anybody what L. Ron Hubbard promised it would give them, which we talked about in an earlier question, spiritual powers and levitation and, cure for any physical ailments and all that. It's demonstrably true that Scientology cannot do any of those things. Why people give any credence to L. Ron Hubbard or anything the guy says, I cannot fathom. I really can't, because there's nothing to any of Dianetics and Scientology that you can't get from any other psychotherapy or other sources, because that's where Hubbard got it from. So anyway, as far as standard tech goes, if we're going to look at things in the context of the bubble world of Scientology, L. Ron Hubbard nailed down what Scientology is and how it's practiced before he died. And Miscavige has been basically making a full-time job out of revising and editing Hubbard's works in order to keep the copyrights in force and in order to keep people buying the materials and buying services, because Scientology is a finite set of practices. It only goes, A, B, C, D, and then you're done. So Miscavige had to come up with a way to remarket these materials. And he's only got so much to remarket. And so he then came up with this idea, and I think it was around 2003 or so, I think. This was when I remember it coming down real hard to start with, that people who had attained the state of clear were not actually clear and had not done it right. And so they were going to have to be told, and then they were going to have to do it over again. And I was actually right there working on that. And there were some very upset people when this was told to them. And the gimmick for it was sort of, we've reviewed your folders, and, it couldn't be that they had had Dianetic auditing in a past life. That wasn't going to count anymore. And if they hadn't had any Dianetics auditing at all, then they couldn't be clear either. And so that was the adjudication line as to whether somebody was or wasn't clear. Since then, they've revised the clear procedure some more, and in order to be able to further invalidate other people's gains in Scientology and tell them that they're not clear, so that they can get more money out of them. So the whole thing, in reality, it's all a bunch of crap, and it's just another way for Miscavige to con this group of people who still believe every word he says for some unfathomable reason. Within the Scientology context, it's that they hadn't done all the steps that Hubbard said to do properly, and so they have to redo the steps so that they get it right. And, it's two ways of looking at it. In the end, it's the same thing. Show me the money. And as far as the staff go, I don't know. I haven't been in a Scientology organization in a couple of years, so I don't know what's going on in those places on a day-to-day basis beyond my knowledge of how Scientology organizations operate. But I don't imagine that they're having a very good time these days, because stats must just suck right now, and it's only going to get worse. All right, and so we come to the end of another episode of Critical Q&A. I really enjoyed answering these questions, and I hope you enjoyed the answers I gave. I, again, want to encourage you to please check out my podcast as well as my other videos. I've got this great series of interviews going on right now with Robin Capella, who's an ex-Sea Org member, and she and I actually even worked together for a little while in the Sea Org, and she's been giving an amazing information in her interview, so if you haven't checked that out, please do so. And consider, if you're getting some value out of what I'm doing here, consider showing me some love through my Patreon campaign or using the support button on my channel. I really want to thank you very much for coming around, and please leave any comments or feedback in the comments section below. I love it when you guys do that. I see everything you give or say, and I want lots of it. So until next week, I'll talk to you later.